Okay, Ellsworth, I'd like you to begin. If you can tell me your name and where and when you were born.
My name's Elsworth Lee Miller, and I was born February the 14th, 1916, in Riverside, California.
And can you tell me a little about your family, brothers and sisters?
My dad was a foreman for an olive plant there in Riverside, and I had, that is, three brothers and two sisters. My mother died soon after I was born, and an aunt came and helped my dad raise me until she passed away about 85 years of age.
So for the most part, you lived in Riverside then in your childhood?
Yes, I went through high school in Riverside, and then I went to a junior college there for a couple of years. Then I went to the University of Southern California and decided to go into medicine, and went to the USC Medical School and graduated in 1944.
So going back to going to USC, did anything what brought you to study medicine?
I had a doctor friend that took care of a family doctor that I got to know real well, and he encouraged me to go into medicine, and I found that the pre-medical subjects were easy for me, and so I just decided I'd give it a try.
And you were there then when the war broke out. Can you remember December 7th and that experience?
I vaguely remember, but I don't really recall anything particular other than didn't have any idea where Pearl Harbor was, and it really didn't mean too much to me. I was busy in college, and it didn't have too much an effect upon me at that time.
Then how did you get into the military, or at what point?
The Army had a program, I think it was called Specialized Training Program, and where, in my case, is my last year at medical school, where they paid my tuition, and at the end of that time, I was obligated to go into the service.
And did you have to do basic training like others?
No, when we were in this, we were given a rank during that last year of medical school of a private first class. And they did marching drills and this type of thing on the grounds there around the hospital, but no basic training as such as I do now.
So knowing that you were going to go in to the military, did you have any thoughts about where you might go, or if even the war would be coming to an end?
No, not at that time. My brother, one brother had been in the Marines for about 30 years and had been taken a prisoner of war in Japan. And so I had thought a few times that I might be interested in the military occupation, but I had no firm ideas what my plans would be.
With your brother being a prisoner of war, was there any communication from him to home that you recall?
There were a few cards which got through, but he he died in prison camp. Actually, he was on board ship. They were having him removed. He was in Philippines, and they were moving the people in the Philippines to Japan, and his ship was bombed en route. He apparently was killed during the bombing of that ship.
Then the news must have gone to your father and the family, and it must have had an impact, on the whole family. And did you have word of that before you actually entered in?
Yes, I did. Yes. But you know, again, I was busy in school, and as a matter of fact, at the time I heard that I did see this was in December 1945 when he was killed. Actually,
Okay.
so I had already entered the Army because I went in about October of 1945 into the military, into the Army.
So you then were going to be assigned into the Army, and how did you get assigned to, or tell me about your assignment where you first were assigned?
Well, when I first entered, I wanted as a first lieutenant in the medical corps. And they send you to what's called a medical field service school, which is, in a sense, basic training. And that was in Carlisle, Pennsylvania. And while there, we received orders on wherever we'd be assigned next. And at that time, when I first learned, I was being assigned to the 10th Light Division.
Mm-hmm.
At that time, it wasn't called the 10th Milan, it was called the 10th Light Division. And of course, I had no idea what the 10th Light Division was. And I remember I asked some of the people around there, and no one knew much about it. They said it had something to do with mules.
So you had no idea what you were getting into.
No, no.
And so once you were assigned, then what happened next?
And then at that time, the division was in Camp Swift, Texas.
Mm-hmm.
They had moved from Leadville down into Camp Swift. So when I arrived at Camp Swift, I remember entering the gates, and to this day I remember it looked like to me acres and acres of mules. And I reported to their adjutant there, and they said I was to be assigned to the 1st Battalion, the 86th, and Colonel Hampton was my CO. So I went to see Colonel Hampton, and he's a very pleasant guy, but sort of a no-nonsense guy. And he said, "Doc," he says, "I know you're going to be busy. We're going out on a exercise in about 2 days, and get your teams together, or you get your medical detachment together, because you'll have to go with us."
And what was that 2-day training like for you?
Well, we went up in the hills, and the main thing was, of course, all our stuff was packed on the mules. So we had 3 mules assigned to the medical detachment. And how in the world did I know anything about mules? Fortunately, one of the men in my medical detachment was from Montana and had been on a horse ranch, so he knew quite a bit about animals. Well, you know, mules, they're smart, but also they're mean things. And if you get in front of them, they'll bite you, and if you get behind them, they'll kick you. And if you try and pack them, because our medical chests that put on, they're like horses, they sort of bloat when you go cinch them up. If you don't get them cinched up tight, is all they have to do is kick once, and your medical chest and all your equipment goes flying through the air. So we had a heck of a time trying to figure out how to get those things saddled or with our equipment and stuff. And we were up in the hills there for about a week, and we just trained on setting up our tents and tried to condition our litter bearers and get them ready for their experience. The main thing I remember was so doggone cold. Texas down there can get colder than the dickens during the wintertime, at least where this was around Bastrop. And that's the main thing I remember about that exercise in the hills.
Anything else about Camp Swift that you can recall?
Not really, no. No, we were only there, I think I don't remember exactly, we were probably there about a month before they loaded us on trains, and we went to Camp Patrick Henry there in Virginia for embarkation. And at that time, at least we were told whether we were going to the Europe or to the Far East. And of course, most of us hoped, I think, that we were going to Europe rather than the Far East. And they didn't tell us until about, I guess, a couple of days out at sea why they told us that we were going to Europe.
Were you able to take a leave right before they told you were going to?
No, we were not, no. As a matter of fact, my wife came down while I was there, and I saw very little of her because by the time I said we went like into the hills for a week or so, and we were busy getting our aid men and litter bearers trained, why I saw very little of her, and so no, we did not get any leave or anything.
Let me go back, since you mentioned you were married at the time. What year were you married?
I was married in 1941, my first year of medical. I just finished my first year in medical school.
And you met her at USC?
No, I met her in Riverside. I went to a junior college. When I finished high school, I went to a junior college, and that's where I met my wife.
And her name?
Margaret Adele Miller, or for Hiller was her name before I married.
Now, sometimes they made accommodations for wives at the forts. Did they make any accommodations for her?
No.
So where was she when you were in camp at Camp Swift?
She lived in a little town called Smithville, which is, I don't know, probably about 5 miles outside of Camp Swift.
Okay, so she was there, and then, but you had a chance to let her know then that you were going to be going overseas.
Yes, I saw her some, but I probably really only saw her maybe 5 or 6 times in that time that I was there at Swift.
Yeah, and at that point, then you didn't know where you were going to go, so there was nothing you could really say to her.
No, I didn't
know. When then you were on ship, and you were on. Do you remember the name of the ship that you were on?
No, I don't. My ship was what they did. I guess the regiment. They were loaded on I think it was the Argentina. It was a luxury liner before the war. But they had to split the doctors up with other ships in the convoy.
Mm-hmm.
So I was assigned, it was a much smaller ship, and it was a regular Army, it was transport. It was used for transporting families and stuff before the war. But it was about half the size, I think, of that Argentina. And I remember that we had some fairly heavy storms going across the Atlantic, and I remember that I sure would have liked been in Argentina in those days, because that thing just seemed to sort of roll along. But that little thing I was on, it bounced around and roll, and the only good thing about it was there was a USO group on board the ship, which would help entertain us on board the ship.
Yeah, that would be, because the USO, I don't know if they were also on board the other ships.
I don't know.
Any other memories on going over, on that, coming overseas?
The only thing I remember, we had a Catholic chaplain that, there was, I think, 4 of us to a room I was in, the stateroom. And, of course, the chaplains had these field old alders or whatever you want to call them were set up for their services.
Mm-hmm.
And they were collapsible things, but they had a lot of wine with them, like sacrament wine.
Mm-hmm.
And I remember that I think us 4 guys drank all of the sacrament wine before we got to Italy.
Well, it had to be used up, so you might as well.
Yeah.
Okay, so you were on ship, and then you landed in.
They landed in Naples. Actually, we got into the harbor there the day before Christmas. And then they unloaded us that evening. The problem was, as I say, that with me, that because they had put me on the other ship, my duffel bag and everything, it was put on the Argentina. So when we landed, all I had was what I was wearing. I had nothing else. And I didn't get that stuff for 3 or 4 days afterwards. And they moved us up. It was called, I think it was Magnolia. That was the name of the place. It was an old, it was a school for, I think, handicapped children. And it was just being built. And so there were windows, but there weren't any glass in the windows or anything. And the darn thing was marble flooring and everything. And it was, of course, it was winter time, snow around, and I remember that was horribly cold. And I spent most of my time shivering around, and actually, at that time, as far as any casualties were concerned, we weren't involved with casualties. We had quite a few people who had colds and this type of thing. But we were only there a few days, actually. And then it was the 1st Battalion, and they loaded us on these 40 and 8 boxcars to take us up to Pisa. And about halfway up, we had a train wreck. It actually didn't injure any of our people, but the train couldn't go any further, so they didn't load us on truck and trucked us up. Now the rest of the regiment, they went by ship. I was trying to remember if the 48 boxcars, actually, there was only about 6 of us in there because I was with the headquarters company, and there was Colonel Hampton and his executive officer and I think his supply officer and a few people. There was only about 6 of us aboard. And I remember it was so cold that we even built a kindling fire in that boxcar to keep warm.
At this point, had you met any of the Italian people, or?
Well, no.
Yeah, some troops I know were they landed in Naples and were taken on other smaller ships up the coastline.
Yeah.
And then others were on rail cars, as you said.
Well, I think it was just the 1st Battalion that went up. They went to on that 48 boxcar thing, I believe.
How long did you stay in Pisa, and did you get a chance to go to Pisa itself, or?
We were in Pisa. They used it as a staging area. In other words, that's where we began to get all our equipment and stuff together. And at that time, we set up tents and stuff. Again, it was cold, a lot of snow, rain, and I got a sinus infection, and I got sicker than a dog, and so I was hospitalized at a station hospital. So they were there about. I must have been there about 3 or 4 weeks. I really don't remember exactly. And then that's when they found out, when they were getting the outfit to move make this assault on Riva Ridge. So I remember the regimental commander, the medical guy, they were a regimental surgeon who came down and said, look, Lee, he said, if you can't come back to the outfit, we're going to have to get a replacement. And because the people in the hospital were glad to have me, and they used me to help them. But you know, I had by that time worked up a relationship with the outfit, and I said, "Oh, I want to come back." So, but at the time then we moved towards the Riva Ridge area. That's when I joined them again.
And how did you get up to that area? Was it by trucks or walking or a combination?
By trucks, to a point, and then they moved us into a little town at the base of Riva Ridge at night, and of course because they didn't, they had to go under, so the Germans wouldn't know we were entering there, and so we had to walk quite a distance at night to sneak into the town. But up near there, though, we went on by trucks. Now, the medical detachment, I don't know if you're familiar with the setup for medical detachment or not, but the medical detachment in a battalion, there's what's called a medical detachment, which consists of about 40 men. Again, I've forgotten exactly. And of these 40 men, about 7 or about 8 of them are assigned to the aid station itself. Mm-hmm. And that consists of a medical officer, and then I had an assistant who was a medical administrative officer who took care of all the administrative things. Then we had a couple of medical technicians, we had a couple of surgical technicians, and a guy that took care of the other administrative things that make medical records and stuff. And then we had litter bearers. We had at least 4 or 5 teams of litter bearers. And these are consisted of about 4 men per litter team. And then each company was assigned a medical aid man. And so that took care of the 40 plus people we had.
So the medical aid man, is that what you would be called a medic? When soldiers would be yelling for medic, that's who they were calling for?
Because each company had an aid man.
And the aid man actually was with the company.
Yes.
You were with the aid station,
yeah.
And then the rest were with the company.
The litter bearers stayed with us too, with the aid station. But the company aid men, they stayed with the company all the time. Mm-hmm. And then there was a regimental surgeon, and he had an assistant, and he took care basically of the regimental headquarters.
So all of you are there now at the base of Riva Ridge, and it's about to happen. Can you recall what some of your thoughts might have been before it all began?
Well, no, I really know. I of course was briefed on how they were planning to assault the Riva Ridge, what time it was going to be about, and of course our problem was how are we going to get the wounded off of that mountain, and because you see it'd take any place from 2 up to even 10 hours to get a lot of us wounded from the top of that mountain or hill to the aid station. And then there was a problem to get them from the aid station on back. Now normally an aid station we're primarily responsible for taking care of just getting them to the aid stations from the rifle companies. And then they had a backup of what they call ambulance companies, which would come in and evacuate them from our aid station back to the collecting companies or to the surgical centers and stuff. But lots of times when you were just inundated with that, they didn't have the capability to take care of that. So a lot of times our own litter bearers, would have to take them back away. But we were talking a lot of time, you know. It's amazing when you read now about the capability of what they can do in Iraq and a matter of hours they're back in this country. But there, you're talking, as I say, up to 10 or maybe 12 hours to getting maybe people back to some sort of a medical installation. Because of the aid station, it primarily was doing triage. You could stop bleeding, this type of thing, but you couldn't actually do any surgical procedures or take care of them other than just give them plasma if they're in shock, and then get them out of there.
Get them back further.
Yeah.
Okay, River Ridge was a night assault.
Mm-hmm.
And do you recall when you first got any injured soldiers?
Well, it started, of course, right after the assault started. I really don't remember I can't specifically remember when, but it was certainly soon after that. You begin early in the morning. You begin to hear gunfire, small arm fire, and then pretty much heavy gunfire. And so right after that, we began to get casualties, and we treated both our people and also the German troops that were injured.
Well, now our troops, I would imagine, would be sent back. But what happened with the Germans that were wounded? Were they sent anywhere?
No, we evacuated them just like we did our people. We treated it basically the same as our people.
Did you have any weapons in your aid station that you recall? Were you ever trained in any weapons? Or?
I never carried any weapons. Some of my medical detachment people had weapons. They really shouldn't have had, but they did. They're certainly, to my knowledge, never used them. But they always felt that in case we were overrun, at least they would be able to put up some sort of a resistance. And the other thing with treating people in cold weather and mountainous terrain like we were in is that cold weather would freeze our plasma, some of our fluids that we used to treat, and freeze them, and it was worthless. And I remember that we had, I think they were called heating pads. You know, you moisten them and it'd become warm, and we used to take and wrap those heating pads around our bottles of plasma and stuff to try and keep the stuff close. But that was one of the big problems we had in cold weather medicine.
Yeah, just keeping it warm. I never would have thought of that.
Otherwise, it'd just freeze on you. Yeah.
You were there for a few days there at the base of River Ridge before
Yes.
moving on?
Yeah, I don't remember how long. We were there a few days, and during that time they put up this tramway. And the tramway you see in quite a few of the pictures is right. My aid station was right by that. And of course that was a big help in getting the wounded off of River Ridge. So that way you could get down half the time, or even an hour or so. You know.
Well, River Ridge was the first night, and then the next night was Belvedere. And so you were still at that same
Yeah,
aid station
yeah.
during the Belvedere offensive.
Right. But we'd still get casualties from that action, and the next action, the next little, again, I can't remember the names of those hills, right, you say, Riva del Torrent or whatever it was. I just don't remember the names of those places. So we were active all that time, taking care of people from the other battalions and stuff.
Mhm.
And as I say, I just offhand don't remember how long we were there.
That you moved along with the troops. I'm just trying to think here now what there was going through it. You would move along with him. What about you hear the troops getting some recreation, or they were able to get sent back from the? Were you also given that opportunity?
Oh yeah, we go back or what we call rest area. Oh yes, we stayed with the say we were attached or stayed with the headquarters company of the battalion, and you know, we go back to the rest areas or go offline, sure, and then we, like the rest of the troops, we have, could take some time off and do whatever we wanted to.
Do you recall what you might have did in some of this rest area time or rest area places?
Well, of course, even with rest area, we usually had to set up an aid station. Even then, take care of the people, our troops had gone back. So we were busy, but not to the extent we were when we were actually in combat and were treating casualties and stuff. It's interesting that when we, in our basic training course here in the States, why we're taught to erect tents and this type of thing. Well, when we got over there, where actually action-wise, we soon realized, well, tents were worthless in action. Number one, they'd be shredded in seconds by the shrapnel and stuff. So we always set up in the Italian houses, because most Italian houses are built out of rocks or cement stuff. And you go, that would protect you from the small arms fire and mainly from shrapnel stuff. Because really, we weren't exposed too much to small arms fire. An aid station was usually any place from a couple of 100 yards from the rifle companies were in action, or back maybe a half a mile. And so small arms fire, while we certainly occasionally would get involved with that, but it really wasn't a great concern to us, because it was usually from snipers, or of course during the latter part of the war, things were so fluid that as you would go forward and attack, you'd meet pockets of Germans that were bypassed. And all of a sudden you'd find yourself in an area where they were, so you had to be careful of small arms fire. But mortars were our biggest problems, because they'd zero in on our mortars and with their mortars, and you know, I remember many times the shingles of our aid stations were just shattered. And then back further, of course, you would hit the big guns sometimes too. But as I say, mortars were our biggest problem with aid stations.
Do you ever recall one of your own people on the aid station being wounded because of a mortar landing or other?
You know, a few of our boys were. None of them were seriously hit that required really evacuation. Usually they were just small lacerations that I could take care of myself. Now, the other part of the danger was that, of course, you know, we didn't use mules once we got to Italy. We were given or cars or trucks, and for each aid station you got a Jeep, you got a 3/4 ton truck with a trailer. So we could haul our medical equipment around with that, but the only trouble was because of the terrain, hilly and mountains and stuff. When they go on the offensive, we had to stay with the rifle companies. So we couldn't get our equipment through. I mean, you had to leave them behind. And 3 of my people, as a matter of fact, my administrative officer was badly hit, and 2 of my other people were killed trying to bring the vehicles up. That they ran into pockets of Germans as we bypassed them. So really, the only people were actually killed were people trying to bring up our vehicles. I never had anyone killed actually in the aid station, no. But I had them shrapnel lacerations, stuff like that.
Are there any other places there in the hill towns that you can recall, things that stand out at maybe various aid stations? I know there was the push up to Casteldelano and then towards the end of the Apennines, but anything else there in that area that you can recall?
None, I really can't, no. The only, probably the most scary part with me was the one occurrence that we just left Bologna and was beginning to drop down into the Po Valley, and this is an evening and dusk, and the whole regiment or the whole battalion was gone, and we were a long string of cars, and I was in my Jeep, and I had this 3/4 ton truck hauling the medical supplies behind, and we came down this road that crossed another road, and so we turned on this crossroad, and the guy the truck that I had behind me, just as he turned, some other car hit him. And it was a German car, and all of a sudden, all hell broke loose. Rifle shots began to, and the column stopped. So I had to stop, and our Jeep was hit by at least two rifle shots. And I had the driver, and I had another aid guy with me who jumped off, and the hill was kind of was up higher. Or ditches on both sides, and we jumped into ditches. Well, you could hear Germans yelling and all kinds of chattering, and bullets were flying, and I didn't have any idea where anyone was. So I began to work my way out. I and the driver began to work our way down this ditch were ahead of us, because I figured there must be our people. I mean, our people were obviously ahead of us, and we came to I guess I don't think they were going to live there. It must have been sort of like a barn. So we got in there, and a couple of wounded people came in, so we tried to help them, and this, I suppose, about a half an hour passed, and then all of a sudden we began to hear tanks, and there was about 6 of us in there, and we figured, gee, what should we do? Because we didn't know where we get any protection. So we got out of that doggone barn and continued on down the road, hopefully to find the other people. And sure enough, the little tanks fired off and blew that barn to pieces. Well, about, I suppose, another 15 minutes, we did run across another house, and in there was quite a few of our people. And we'd set up an aid station there. But then we were only there about another probably 15 minutes or half an hour again, I don't remember the time, when the tanks come in again. You could hear them. So we decided all of us, we better get out of there. And by this time, though, we'd caught up with the other people in front of us had coming back. So we jumped in their vehicles and went on down the road to get out of there. And I don't know how many people, I mean, how many, I don't know. There weren't too many people killed, I don't think, in that action, but sure tore up a lot of our equipment and stuff. And it's written up as an ambush, but you know, to this day, I'm not sure it was an ambush or whether the Germans were as confused as we were. We just accidentally hit.
Well, they were saying that a number of times, as you indicated, the advance was so quick that they would leave pockets, and you know, and they had to mop up later.
Right. So I don't. But it's written up in all these books as an ambush. But I'd say I'm not so sure that the Germans weren't as surprised as we were. And I think that's about the closest I felt. But that was a lot of times when you'd be up and pieces of shrapnel would fly by you, and you'd just kind of think you're so lucky stars and that chunk of steel didn't catch you. But I don't know. That time I felt kind of no one there to protect me. Yeah.
And then from the Po Valley, you continued on to Lake Garda area.
Yeah. Yeah, the Po Valley, I think we walked, I think I walked over all, through most of the Po Valley, because again, when we left after that ambush, or whatever you want to call it, we had to take off again on an attack and go through the hills. We had to leave our vehicles behind, and they never did catch up with us until we pretty hit the Po River. And God, I remember for what, 2 days, it seemed like it had done nothing but walk. And when you're in that mode, you couldn't set up an aid station or anything, because you were just constantly moving. And you had whatever equipment you had to carry it.
Do you remember going through towns and Italians greeting you, or?
A couple of times, yeah.
Would they offer you anything?
Yeah, they'll offer you. Remember wine and vegetables. I remember onions and stuff. My God, I loved onions. And a couple of times why our own, that was another thing with an aid station. We got what I think they were called 10-in-1 rations, because we did keep some of the casualties maybe 24 hours. People who really weren't serious enough to be sent back, but they still had to be watched for maybe 24 hours. So we'd keep them in aid station. So we were given rations to feed these people. Matter of fact, I had a cook. I mean, another guy who was supposed to have been a cook that would feed our patients in this little aid station.
With those 10-in-1
Yeah,
rations?
they're called 10-in-1 rations. Yeah, they weren't much better than the sea rations. Yeah. And a couple of times we'd, Germans used a lot of horses, you know, pull their equipment around because they were low on gas and stuff. And so a lot of their guns and stuff they'd pull with horses. And of course, sometimes these poor horses would be killed. And I remember when this one cook of mine, he'd go out and carve a hunk of meat off those horses, and so we'd have steaks.
How was that? How was horse steak?
Not bad when you're not eating, when you only have to eat sea rations and stuff. Pretty tough.
Do you remember once you crossed the Po being in the Lake Garda area?
Oh yeah. Yeah, the Lake Garda area was, you see, the lake and with roads down both sides. And they had tunnels down both sides. Now we went on them. We're on the, I say the right side, I don't know direction-wise, whether it was woods or
Probably
south
east.
or
I think it was east.
East, whatever it was. And of course the Germans were on the other side. And they had more firepower with the Germans, is what I'm told. They had these 88s, which were more powerful than what we had at that time on the other side. So they blew some of these tunnels, shut them off. So to get around, they had these boats. I think they were called duck boats, I believe, was what the names of these things were. And so to get around these, bypass these tunnels. Well, that was pretty harrowing, at least it was for me, because here you were in that boat out there, and here the Germans were across the way, taking pot shots at you with their 88s or other howitzers that they had. And then when we got about halfway up Lake Garda, they took us back on shore because the tunnels were open from then on. But again, the 1st Battalion, they had to outflank the Germans. So we had to, again, climb the doggone hills on the side so they could outflank the Germans while the rest of the battalion people went on up. The 1st Battalion had to. So again, and that was a messy thing because, again, you were just moving all the time. And that's about another time I think time is close to me because big old hunk of shrapnel took my knapsack and split the thing for me.
From an 88?
I don't know what it was from, but it was a hunk of shrapnel. Fortunately, it didn't hit me, but it sure put a crease in my knapsack. Yeah. And so then, well, that was pretty much the end of the war when we got up there at the end of Lake Garda, a town called Strasia. So then there were a couple other towns, like I think Rivierato or something like that was where we set up an aid station finally after we got across the Lake Garda. And we set up a aid station there, and they were, I don't know, we stayed there maybe a week or so. Matter of fact, I got pictures there of when we were there. And that's when I was told that we were going to be in the Army of Occupation. So they moved us from there up around about what's called Udine area, Udina, up near the Yugoslav border. And then we stayed in this little town of, we were in a town called Breda di Soda, the 1st Battalion was. And then about this time, of course, during these period of time, as I say, about every week or so, if you wanted to go on a leave and visit some of these areas, well, you could. So I'd been this beautiful area called Lake Majority, which you've probably heard about. Went to that area a couple of times. And then they had a deal where you could take off for any place you wanted to in Europe. They given orders, and they used the cover that you're writing a history of the war. So I took three of my guys, and we took off and went up into Germany, and we went to Munich and on up through Heidelberg and went into Paris, and then came back down through France, down to Lyons. And when we crossed over into Italy again, we were in a rest stop, which and there were some 10th Mountain guys there, and so we talked with them and found out that 10th Mountain was no longer in this town, because we were gone 2 weeks by that time. And they said, no, they're heading back to the States. Said right now they're in, we were in Leghorn, I guess, yeah, Leghorn. So we said, gee, we better get back, otherwise we'll be left over here. So we went back, so we found them down Leghorn, sure enough. And the other interesting thing, the guy in my medical detachment, that Von Trapp, Rupert Von Trapp, he was the singer. So Rupert was an interesting guy in that he had finished medical school in Germany. He graduated. And then, of course, see, they came back, the story about him not escaping like they did through the Sound and Music of a bunch of baloney. Actually, they came back to this country in the latter, late 30s, or just before the war started. But he couldn't, apparently there was a couple of subjects or something, at least the medical profession said he had to complete these before he could actually get a license. But, so he was in my medical detachment. And that was really a big help, because he was a good doctor. And he helped me a lot. Well, Rupert decided that he wanted to visit his relatives there in Salzburg. So I said, well, let's go up there, let's try and make it. So we did. I took Rupert, and he has a brother that was in one of the rival companies, and we drove into Salzburg. That's when we were up around Yugoslavia border there. And he visited them. Well, a couple of things. One was, well, we weren't supposed to do that. Number one, to cohabitate with, they had some law and that he couldn't cohabitate with the German people there. And the other thing was that there was checkpoints going up there held by the British. And you had to have orders to get through. Well, the thing of it was, going up, we never hit any of these checkpoints. But coming back a few days later, here we did. And of course, these British guys, I'm sure they did it just for fun. I mean, just to give us a hard time. But they wouldn't let us through. And so they were going to have to turn us over to the British police and all that sort of stuff, military police. But we finally talked them out of it. But I think they did it. They call us swanning. They said, you're just out swanning. You don't have any business around here. But it was interesting. Yeah.
So you didn't have to give them any cigarettes or anything to get through?
No, never. Didn't have it, because I didn't smoke, and neither did these other guys. Yeah.
There in, so you came back and met the rest of the guys at Leghorn,
Yeah.
and then you or boarded ship again and came back.
Yeah, yeah, and I can't think of the name of it. It was a victory ship. Well, I don't remember the name of the ship. Most of the regiment came back on that, I think. I mean, for instance, I know the other doctor, Dr. Mikey, that wrote the book, he came back. As a matter of fact, he writes in his book that coming back, one of the troop guys developed a bellyache, and so there wasn't a ship's doctor. The only doctors there was myself and this Mikey, and then I think there was another battalion surgeon, a guy by the name of Myers. So of course we saw him. Well, we figured the guy had an appendicitis. But as I say, I wasn't a surgeon. The other two guys weren't surgeons as such. But we figured, well, we had to get his appendix out. So we operated. And Mikey gave the anesthetic. The other guy, this Myers, did have a little bit of surgical experience. So we said, well, he'd have to be the surgeon. And I was the assistant. So we operated on the guy. And the guy did have an appendicitis. And we saved him, because I'm sure it would have looked like it was ready to break.
Wow, yeah.
But that is interesting. Then, yeah, we came back to Camp Swift, and they were going to deactivate the outfit. And, of course, I didn't have enough time in to get out yet, and so I got assigned to a general hospital. It was in Van Nuys, California, from Camp Swift.
So when they assigned you, then did you and your wife move over here then to Van Nuys? And
Yeah, yes. As a matter of fact, wife came back with me when we were in at Camp Swift in Colorado there we were there probably about a month, something like that. Yeah, because when I came back, well, that was the other thing. When we came back to this, the reason I understand that they sent, well, originally they were going to keep us there as occupation troops. And I understand there were 6 or 7 divisions that had been overseas for 2 years, 3 years, or 4 years. And because the plan was all sort of going to have to go to fight Japan. And I understand these guys, they were unhappy here. This 10th Mountain was going to be given a cushy job of occupation troops. Here they'd been fighting the war for the last 3 or 4 years, and they're going to go back to Japan. So they made such a bunch of noise about it that they had it changed, and so that's what the plans were for us. We were going to go to Japan. Of course, the funny part what it is, about the time I landed in the United States, the war ended, and so those guys were still stuck over their occupation troops, and we were...
you were home already.
We were home already, yeah.
Okay, we're going to stop here for a tape change.
Okay.